Blaise Pascal was a brilliant and multifaceted figure whose short life left an enduring legacy across mathematics, physics, philosophy, and theology. Born in 1623 France, Pascal was a child prodigy who made groundbreaking contributions from a young age. He invented one of the first mechanical calculators, advanced the understanding of fluid dynamics and pressure, co-founded probability theory, and later turned to deep philosophical and theological reflections. A man of reason and faith, logic and belief, Pascal stood at the crossroads of science and spirituality. This script explores his remarkable journey, timeless ideas, and the profound impact he left on the world. Chapter 1. Origins and Childhood Genius. The city of Clermont-Ferrand and a family of intellect, Blaise Pascal was born on the 19th of June, 1623, in the ancient city of Clermont-Ferrand, located in central France in the province of Auvergne. This region, surrounded by extinct volcanoes and medieval fortresses, was more known for its rustic charm and religious traditions than for scientific innovation. Yet from this unlikely backdrop would emerge one of the most revolutionary minds the world has ever seen. Pascal's family belonged to the minor nobility. His father, Etienne Pascal, was a magistrate in the Cour des Aides, a type of appellate court that specialized in financial matters and tax disputes. But Etienne was more than a legal expert. He was also an accomplished mathematician with an inquisitive mind. His passion for learning, especially mathematics, would play a pivotal role in shaping his son's early education. Blaise's mother, Antoinette Begon, came from a wealthy merchant family known for its refined tastes and social grace. Tragically, she passed away when Blaise was just 3 years old. Her early death would leave a lasting emotional scar on the boy, who remained unusually sensitive throughout his life. After Antoinette's death, Etienne took on the dual role of father and educator. He resolved to homeschool Blaise and his two sisters, Gilberte and Jacqueline. The Pascal household quickly transformed into a vibrant intellectual sanctuary filled with books, instruments, and philosophical debate. A child who asked too much. From a very early age, Blaise displayed signs of prodigious intelligence. Unlike other children, who spent time playing or mimicking their parents, Blaise would sit in corners, scribbling geometric shapes on the floor or staring intently at a pendulum. By the age of 5, he began to ask deeply complex questions about space, motion, time, and God. Etienne, though impressed, chose to follow an unconventional educational path. He withheld formal instruction in mathematics, believing that young Blaise should first master languages and classical literature. He feared that if exposed to math too early, Blaise would lose interest in other subjects. But this strategy backfired. One day, Etienne discovered Blaise in a room scribbling strange notations on the wall. The boy, entirely self-taught, had invented his own terms and notation to describe geometric concepts. At just 12 years old, without a teacher or textbook, Blaise had begun to reinvent Euclidean geometry. This revelation shook Etienne to the core. Realizing that the boy's mind operated at a level beyond his age, he gave in and introduced him to Euclid's elements. Blaise devoured the ancient text in days. Jacqueline Pascal, sister, poet, and confidante. Blaise's sister Jacqueline was a gifted writer and poet. She also played an essential role in Blaise's emotional and spiritual life. The two siblings shared a strong intellectual and emotional bond. While Blaise explored the cosmos with numbers and logic, Jacqueline explored the soul through verse and faith. Their connection became even more important as Etienne's duties took him away from home. Jacqueline and Blaise spent long hours in conversation, often debating the existence of God, the purpose of suffering, and the structure of the universe. Later in life, both would become involved in Jansenism, a strict Catholic reform movement, and their early conversations likely laid the groundwork for those spiritual commitments. The move to Paris and intellectual exposure. In 1631, Étienne Pascal resigned from his position and moved the family to Paris, then a vibrant hub of scientific thought. There, he became involved with an elite group of thinkers known as the Académie Parisienne, an informal scientific society that predated the Royal Academy of Sciences. Through his father's connections, young Blaise met influential figures like Marin Mersenne, a polymath and the central hub of correspondence among Europe's scientists. Mersenne immediately recognized Blaise's genius and became a mentor figure, introducing his works to intellectuals across the continent. By the age of 14, Blaise was regularly attending gatherings where discussions ranged from celestial mechanics to theological debates. It was in this environment that he began developing his own ideas and writing short treatises that astonished older scholars. A treatise that shocked the world. At the age of 16, Blaise Pascal wrote a remarkable essay on conic sections, Essai pour les coniques. This treatise, completed in 1639, explored the properties of hexagons inscribed within conic sections and presented what would later be known as Pascal's theorem. The work was so advanced that many believed it must have been plagiarized or secretly authored by a senior mathematician. When Mersenne sent the treatise to Descartes, the great philosopher dismissed it, assuming a child couldn't have written it. But upon further investigation, it became clear. Blaise Pascal was no ordinary child. He was a mathematical prodigy on par with the likes of Archimedes or Galileo. His theorem would go on to shape the development of projective geometry, influencing mathematicians for centuries. Health struggles begin. Despite his brilliance, Blaise suffered from poor health throughout his life. Starting in his teenage years, he began experiencing intense migraines, gastrointestinal issues, and periods of physical debilitation that kept him bedridden for weeks. These afflictions, poorly understood at the time, were often interpreted as signs of spiritual burden or divine testing. In some of his later writings, Blaise even hinted that his physical suffering sharpened his awareness of human frailty and made his mind more attuned to metaphysical truths, isolation and observation. Pascal often worked alone, locked in rooms for days or weeks. He would fill countless pages with mathematical sketches, questions, and theological musings. His room became a laboratory, a chapel, and a battlefield where reason and faith constantly wrestled for dominance. Visitors described him as both brilliant and intense. He could leap from a heated mathematical discussion into prayer without missing a beat. He rarely smiled, and his speech was often described as measured, exact, and deeply penetrating. A mind on fire. In letters written during this period, Mersenne and others expressed amazement at Pascal's ability to transition fluidly between pure mathematics and metaphysical speculation. Most thinkers of the time specialized in one domain. Pascal mastered many. He was laying the foundations for calculus, probing the essence of vacuums in physics, while simultaneously contemplating man's place in the cosmos. By age 18, Pascal had already surpassed many of the leading scholars in Europe, but he was just getting started. Philosophical intuition emerging. Though young, Pascal showed signs of deep philosophical intuition. Unlike Descartes, who trusted pure reason above all else, Pascal was already skeptical. He sensed that human reason had limits, that logic, while powerful, could never fully grasp the infinite, the divine, or the purpose of suffering. These doubts would not derail his scientific work. Instead, they enriched it, giving it an existential urgency. To Pascal, equations were not just symbols, they were windows into the mind of God. Foundations for a lifetime. By the end of his teenage years, Blaise Pascal had developed a deep understanding of Euclidean and projective geometry, written a groundbreaking theorem that advanced the field of conic sections, impressed France's intellectual elite with his unique mind, suffered his first waves of debilitating illness, formed a deep bond with his sister Jacqueline, one that would carry profound theological consequences later, begun a lifelong inner battle between faith and reason, body and mind, science and soul. It was clear to all who encountered him that Pascal's mind was extraordinary. But what was yet to be revealed was how he would forever alter mathematics, physics, philosophy, and theology, often at the same time. Chapter 2. Mathematical Contributions That Changed the World. The rise of Pascal as a mathematician. By the age of 16, Blaise Pascal was no longer simply a prodigy. He was a force reshaping the landscape of mathematics. His early work on conic sections had already stunned France's intellectual elite, but that was only the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, Pascal would pioneer several mathematical fields, including projective geometry, probability theory, and combinatorics, laying groundwork that would influence generations of scientists, economists, and philosophers. His mind worked differently. While others toiled for years on solving abstract problems, Pascal often approached them with a philosopher's sensitivity and a logician's rigor, producing breakthroughs that seemed to come from nowhere. Pascal's theorem and projective geometry. One of Pascal's most celebrated early achievements was his theorem of the hexagram, now known simply as Pascal's theorem. Stated simply, if a hexagon is inscribed in a conic ellipse, parabola, or hyperbola, then the 3 points of intersection of opposite sides lie on a straight line. This elegant result was a major contribution to projective geometry, a field that studies properties preserved under projection, such as perspective in art and architecture. Pascal's approach anticipated work by Jean Desargues, Girard Desargues, and even future mathematicians like Poncelet and Gergonne. The theorem had far-reaching consequences not just for mathematics, but also for how people conceptualize space and perspective, especially in the scientific and artistic realms. The origins of probability theory. Perhaps Pascal's most lasting influence in mathematics came from a seemingly mundane problem, gambling. In 1654, the renowned gambler and nobleman Antoine Gambeau, known as the Chevalier de Marais, posed a question. If a player has a game of chance interrupted, how should the pot be fairly divided based on the probability of each player winning? This problem, deceptively simple, had stumped mathematicians for years. De Marais brought it to Pierre de Fermat, who then discussed it with Pascal. The ensuing correspondence between Fermat and Pascal laid the foundation for modern probability theory. They developed a systematic method to calculate the likelihood of various outcomes using combinatorial mathematics and expected value concepts that underpin everything from insurance and finance to weather forecasting and artificial intelligence today. The Pascal-Fermat letters, a turning point. The letters exchanged between Pascal and Fermat revealed a new methodology in mathematics, not just solving specific problems, but abstracting principles to create universal tools. One of their key insights was the concept of equally likely outcomes, which allowed for rigorous probability calculations. This method of assigning numerical probabilities to outcomes set the stage for future mathematicians like Jacob Bernoulli, Laplace, and Kolmogorov to formalize the theory. Pascal's calculations in these letters were not only accurate but often elegant, reducing complex scenarios to recursive formulas and symmetries. Pascal's triangle and combinatorics. To solve problems in probability, Pascal developed a powerful computational tool, the arithmetic triangle, now universally known as Pascal's triangle. This triangular array of numbers, in which each number is the sum of the 2 numbers directly above it, allows for the quick calculation of binomial coefficients. These coefficients are central to expanding powers of binomials, e.g., plus. calculating combinations, N, choose K, analyzing probabilities in games of chance, understanding properties of numbers, e.g., Fibonacci sequences, prime numbers, etc. Pascal's triangle had been known in various cultures, e.g., in China by Jie Xian and Yang Hui, but Pascal was the first in Europe to systematically analyze its properties and connect it with binomial expansions and combinatorics. The treatise Traité du triangle arithmétique. Pascal formalized his findings in a work titled Traité du triangle arithmétique, Treatise on the Arithmetical Triangle, written in 1654. This was a masterwork in clarity and abstraction. It included general formulas for binomial coefficients, recursive technique for calculations, applications to probability theory, principles of symmetry and diagonal relationships. Pascal was not merely doing arithmetic, he was shaping the language of statistical science. Infinite series and the calculation of areas. Pascal also contributed to the theory of infinite series, particularly in the context of calculating areas under curves, a precursor to integral calculus. He explored ways to approximate areas bounded by parabola segments and straight lines using increasingly smaller subdivisions, an approach known later as integration. Although Newton and Leibniz would later formalize calculus, Pascal's work laid essential groundwork. He was among the first to use summation of infinitesimals to calculate areas, analyze the convergence of infinite series. Establish connections between geometry and algebra. Pascal's legacy in game theory and economics. Unintentionally, Pascal's work on probability and expectation became a bedrock for game theory, decision theory, and behavioral economics. His ideas are central to modern studies on risk assessment, utility theory, strategic decision-making, insurance and portfolio management. When today's economists build models of decision-making under uncertainty, they are, knowingly or not, standing on the shoulders of Pascal's probabilistic revolution. Beyond numbers, the moral weight of mathematics. Pascal did not see mathematics as a mere tool for solving practical problems. He believed it had moral and spiritual implications. In his view, mathematics teaches the mind how to think rightly. He saw in the structure of probability and geometry a deeper reflection of order and harmony, which, to him, were signs of divine design. His theological work later referenced his mathematical insights, especially when arguing that rational thinking could guide one to faith, though not guarantee it. A mathematician of many dimensions. By his early 32nd, Pascal had already revolutionized geometry with his theorem on conics, co-founded probability theory with Fermat, systematized combinatorics with Pascal's triangle, anticipated integral calculus through his work on infinitesimals, developed tools for decision-making that are still in use in economics and data science today. His mathematical work remains some of the most influential and enduring in the history of the discipline. But Pascal's genius did not stop at numbers. As we will see in the following chapters, he would soon turn his sights to natural philosophy, theology, and the very question of human existence. Chapter 3. Contributions to Physics and Natural Philosophy. The Renaissance of Natural Philosophy. In the 17th century, natural philosophy, what we now call science, was undergoing a profound transformation. Thinkers like Galileo, Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and René Descartes were challenging Aristotelian orthodoxy and laying the groundwork for modern physics. In this dynamic intellectual landscape, Blaise Pascal emerged as a central figure. Pascal's mind, already forged in the rigor of mathematics, turned naturally to the physical world. He began asking a fundamental question: what are the forces that govern matter, motion, and pressure? His investigations into air pressure, fluid mechanics, and vacuums led to groundbreaking insights that forever changed physics and practical engineering. The question of vacuum. Against Aristotle, the idea of a vacuum, a space devoid of matter, was considered impossible by most classical thinkers, particularly Aristotle, who argued that nature abhors a vacuum. But in the 1642nd, inspired by reports of Evangelista Torricelli's experiments in Italy, in which mercury was used to create partial vacuums, Pascal began to suspect that air itself had weight and that vacuums could, in fact, exist. Etienne Pascal, Blaise's father, had performed preliminary barometric experiments. Blaise took those tests further. The mercury tube experiment. Pascal repeated Torricelli's experiment. He filled a glass tube with mercury, inverted it into a dish, and observed that some of the mercury stayed in the tube while the rest fell into the dish. The space above the mercury was perhaps a vacuum. Skeptics argued that the space must contain some invisible substance. Pascal disagreed. He hypothesized that the height of the mercury column was due to atmospheric pressure, the weight of the air above pushing down on the mercury in the dish. To test this, he proposed a now famous experiment, the Puy de Dôme experiment, proof of atmospheric pressure. Pascal could not perform the high-altitude experiment himself due to health issues, but he enlisted the help of his brother-in-law, Florent Perrier, who in 1648 climbed the Puy de Dôme, a volcanic mountain near Clermont-Ferrand, carrying mercury and a barometer. At the base of the mountain, Perrier recorded the height of the mercury column. He then climbed to the summit and found that the column had dropped, confirming Pascal's hypothesis. Air pressure decreases with altitude. This was more than a clever experiment. It was scientific proof that the atmosphere has weight, that a vacuum can exist, and that pressure is a measurable physical force. Pascal's law of pressure. Building on these discoveries, Pascal formulated what is now known as Pascal's law, or Pascal's principle. Pressure applied to a confined fluid is transmitted equally in all directions throughout the fluid. This law is the foundation of hydraulics. Pascal's law enabled the design of hydraulic presses and brake systems. Modern machinery still relies on his principles. The law also revolutionized engineering, plumbing, and fluid dynamics, showing how pressure could be used as a mechanical multiplier. The invention of the syringe and hydraulic press. Based on Pascal's law, Blaise invented one of the most important medical tools in history, the syringe. He also developed the concept for the hydraulic press, a device capable of lifting large weights using small input forces. These practical applications made Pascal one of the earliest inventors of applied physics, blending theoretical insight with real-world utility. Pascal and the study of fluids. Pascal's experiments led to deeper inquiries into fluid mechanics, the study of liquids and gases at rest and in motion. He was among the first to differentiate between absolute pressure, gauge pressure, and hydrostatic pressure, and to understand how atmospheric pressure influences boiling points, barometric readings, and fluid flow. His work laid the foundation for the science of pneumatics, the mechanics of liquid flow and hydraulics, the development of air pumps and vacuum chambers, Pascal's experiments and philosophical implications. To Pascal, scientific experimentation was not just a technical exercise, it had metaphysical implications. By proving the existence of a vacuum, he had shattered centuries of Aristotelian doctrine and demonstrated that reality could be known only through careful observation, not inherited wisdom. He believed that nature was a book written by God and that every experiment, every measurement, was a step toward divine understanding. This is why Pascal's notes often blurred the lines between scientific observation and spiritual meditation. Rejection of Descartes' mechanistic universe. Though he respected Descartes, Pascal rejected the purely mechanistic view of the universe. Where Descartes saw the cosmos as a giant clockwork machine, Pascal saw it as both logical and mysterious, governed by laws, but also suffused with beauty and paradox. In his famous phrase, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me," this statement encapsulated his awe toward the universe, not fear of disorder, but fear of its cold intelligibility. His physics, while grounded in reason, was always accompanied by a recognition of human limits, humility, and mystery. A physicist who changed the world. By the time he turned 30, Blaise Pascal had proven the existence of a vacuum, discovered atmospheric pressure, formulated Pascal's law, developed hydraulic technology, contributed to barometry and pneumatics, challenged centuries of Aristotelian dogma, yet he never wrote a formal physics textbook. Instead, his discoveries were scattered across letters, essays, and experimental reports, many of which were only fully appreciated long after his death. Pascal's legacy in physics is not only in what he discovered, but in how he discovered it, through careful observation, bold questioning, and the conviction that truth lay not in tradition, but in the evidence of nature. Chapter 4. The Pascaline, the first mechanical calculator, the birth of an invention from necessity. In the early 1642, as France wrestled with heavy taxation and war expenses, Etienne Pascal was appointed as a tax commissioner in Rouen, Normandy. The position required managing large sums of money, calculating complex levies, and keeping meticulous records of financial transactions. These tasks were not only repetitive, but extremely error-prone. Observing his father struggle night after night with columns of figures, the 8-year-old Blaise Pascal asked himself, "Can a machine do this?" This question, simple yet revolutionary, led to the invention of one of the earliest mechanical calculators in human history, the Pascaline. The vision, automating arithmetic. Pascal envisioned a device that could perform addition and subtraction mechanically, reducing the mental burden on tax officials and clerks. His aim was not just to build a novelty, but to elevate precision and reduce human error in computation. He began sketching designs inspired by clockwork mechanisms and sought ways to convert numerical logic into mechanical motion. The engineering challenge. Building the Pascaline was far from easy. Pascal had to overcome several technical obstacles. Carry-over mechanism. How to make a wheel turn the next wheel when it passed 9 to 0. Decimal alignment. Ensuring digits lined up properly in columns. Durability. Ensuring gears didn't jam or wear down too quickly. User interface. Making the machine easy to operate even by those unfamiliar with machines. After multiple prototypes and refinements, the first working Pascaline was completed in 1642 when Pascal was just 19. The mechanism. How the Pascaline worked. The Pascaline consisted of a series of interlocking wheels, each representing a digit from 0 to 9. Each time one wheel completed a full rotation, it advanced the next wheel by 1 unit, a concept known as mechanical carryover. Key features of the Pascaline. Decimal-based system. Each wheel represented a power of 10. Clockwork precision, borrowed from horology, the study of timekeeping. Viewing window, allowed users to read results. Stylus input. Users used a stylus to rotate wheels manually. The Pascaline could perform addition and subtraction directly, and more complex operations, like multiplication or division, through repeated entries. Public demonstrations and recognition. Pascal demonstrated the Pascaline in salons and scientific gatherings across France. The machine drew widespread attention. A mechanical brain, it symbolized the dawn of a new era of computation. In 1649, King Louis XIV granted Pascal a royal privilege, an early form of a patent, giving him exclusive rights to produce and sell the device. Word of the Pascaline spread throughout Europe. Though not commercially mass-produced, it was recognized as a milestone, of mechanical innovation. Challenges and limitations. Despite its brilliance, the Pascaline had limitations. Complex manufacturing. Each unit was handcrafted and expensive. Limited operations. It didn't support multiplication or division without repetition. Manual effort. Users had to input numbers via stylus. Because of these constraints, the Pascaline was never widely adopted in commerce. Only about 20 original Pascalines were built, many of which are preserved in museums today, including the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris. Philosophical reflections on machinery. Pascal did not see the Pascaline merely as a tool. To him, it was a symbol of human potential and limitation. He famously wrote, "This instrument cannot give thought. It can only show the fruits of thought." In this, Pascal foresaw a major debate in artificial intelligence centuries ahead the line between mechanical calculation and human reasoning. His invention challenged the idea that mathematics required a human mind to operate. Machines could calculate but not think. Influence on later inventions. The Pascaline inspired generations of inventors. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz built his own calculator, the stepped reckoner, in 1672, improving on Pascal's concepts. Charles Babbage, in the 19th century, developed the difference engine and the analytical engine, citing Pascal among his influences. Modern computers trace part of their conceptual ancestry to Pascal's goal, automating arithmetic through logic. Pascal became not only a father of probability and fluid mechanics, but also a pioneer of computing. Legacy in computing history. Pascal's contributions to computing are commemorated in multiple ways. The Pascal programming language, developed in the 1972 by Nicholas Wirth, was named in his honor. It became one of the foundational languages for teaching programming and developing early software. Pascal's philosophy that clarity and structure matter influenced programming design itself. The modern calculator, the computer, and the microprocessor all echo his belief that human intellect could be extended by mechanical reasoning. The Pascaline as a symbol. The Pascaline remains one of the most profound inventions in history, not for how many were made, but for what it represented. The marriage of math and machinery, the belief that thought can be encoded, a challenge to the idea that only humans could perform calculations, a blueprint for future mechanical minds. Pascal, only a teenager at the time, had imagined something decades ahead of his era, a machine that could do what was once considered exclusively human. Though modest in appearance, the Pascaline opened the door to computational thinking, and for that, Blaise Pascal earns his place not only as a scientist and philosopher, but as one of the founders of the digital age. Chapter 5. Conversion and Religious Reflections. A sudden shift from mathematics to God. In the prime of his intellectual life, at the height of his reputation as a mathematician and physicist, Blaise Pascal made a sudden and unexpected turn. In the winter of 1654, something profound happened, something that would redirect the course of his life from science to faith. On the night of the 23rd of November, 1654, Pascal had a spiritual experience so intense that he wrote down everything he felt on a scrap of parchment. He then sewed that note into the lining of his coat and wore it against his heart for the rest of his life. It was only discovered after his death. This note, now known as the Memorial, begins with a single trembling word, fire. The Memorial, a glimpse into the divine. The Memorial is not a theological treatise, it is a raw, emotional outpouring. A few of the most famous lines read, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and scholars. Certainty, certainty, feeling, joy, peace, God of Jesus Christ, forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. He can only be found by the ways taught in the gospel. This was no mere poetic outburst. It marked a conversion, a moment where Pascal abandoned the aloof God of reason and mathematics and embraced the personal, experiential God of Christianity. The Jansenist movement. Pascal's religious rebirth led him to align with the Jansenists, a Catholic reformist group centered around the Abbey of Port Royal. The Jansenists advocated for predestination, divine grace over free will, moral rigor, and humility. A return to early Christian ideals. Though condemned by the Jesuits and Pope, the Jansenists gained a following among intellectuals and ascetics alike. For Pascal, their theology matched what he had experienced: the absolute sovereignty of God, the insignificance of human pride, and the necessity of grace. Pascal's personal piety and lifestyle changes. After his conversion, Pascal underwent a dramatic lifestyle change. He abandoned scientific pursuits for several years. He gave away much of his wealth to the poor. He fasted regularly and practiced self-denial. He refused medical treatment for his chronic ailments, believing suffering brought him closer to Christ. Despite pleas from friends and colleagues to return to mathematics, Pascal remained committed to his spiritual path. He believed that the pursuit of truth in any field was meaningless unless it pointed back to God. The Provincial Letters. In 1656, the French crown cracked down on Jansenism. When one of its leaders, Antoine Arnaud, was condemned by the Sorbonne, Pascal leapt to his defense. What followed was the publication of the Provincial Letters, a series of 18 anonymous letters written with wit, irony, and eloquence, attacking the Jesuit order and defending Jansenist theology. Pascal exposed the moral laxity of the Jesuits, who, in his view, twisted doctrine to please political powers. Using satire, logic, and philosophy, he wrote, "Men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction." The Provincial Letters became wildly popular, not only in theological circles, but in the broader public. It was one of the first times rhetoric and reason were used so effectively in defense of spiritual truth. Philosophical themes in Pascal's faith. Pascal's religious reflections weren't naive or sentimental. He approached faith with the same analytical rigor he brought to mathematics, only now he was focused on the mystery of man, not numbers. Key themes of Pascal's religious philosophy. Human misery and greatness. Man is caught between beast and angel, capable of reasoning, but inclined toward vice. The hidden God, Deus absconditus. God reveals himself to the humble, not through reason, but through the heart. The wager. A brilliant argument for faith betting on God's existence has infinite payoff, while disbelief has infinite risk. Pascal's wager. A rational leap of faith. In what may be his most famous religious argument, Pascal offered a pragmatic justification for belief in God, now known as Pascal's wager. Let us weigh the gain and the loss in wagering that God is. If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager, then, without hesitation, that he is. This was not intended to prove God's existence. Rather, it highlighted the practical necessity of belief, given the eternal consequences. It was a calculated risk, a mathematical approach to metaphysics. Critics called it cold, but for Pascal, it was a reflection of both human limitation and the urgency of salvation. Faith and reason. Opponents or allies? Pascal never rejected reason. Instead, he believed that reason had limits. One of his most famous quotes sums this up: "The heart has its reasons of which reason knows nothing." To him, reason can lead us to the door of faith, but it cannot walk us through. Divine truth requires a leap, not into ignorance, but into trust. He rejected the rationalism of Descartes and the mysticism of irrational faith. In between those extremes, Pascal found a middle path, a faith grounded in humility, experience, and revelation. Writing the Pensées. In his final years, Pascal began compiling notes for what he intended to be a comprehensive apologetic work, a defense of Christianity for the skeptical intellectual. This would become his most famous spiritual work, Pensées, Thoughts. It is not a finished book, but a collection of fragments, aphorisms, and reflections raw, profound, and often poetic. In them, Pascal addresses the restlessness of the human heart, the absurdity of life without God, the vanity of earthly pursuits, the silence of the universe, the grandeur of divine grace. The Pensées remains one of the greatest religious texts in history, a paradoxical blend of despair and hope, doubt and conviction, logic and passion. A saint of the intellect. Though never canonized, Pascal has often been called a saint of the mind. His conversion was authentic, not opportunistic. His writings brought spirituality to skeptics. His life embodied the paradoxes he so often described: suffering and joy, doubt and faith, genius and humility. In turning from science to faith, Pascal never abandoned reason, he simply redirected it, using his brilliant mind to pursue what he believed was the highest truth. To this day, his writings remain a beacon for those seeking to reconcile science and religion, faith and reason, the heart and the mind. Chapter 6. Final Years and a Life of Suffering. A body in decline, a spirit on fire. By his mid-30s, Blaise Pascal was physically ailing, but intellectually and spiritually ablaze. He had devoted his youth to mathematics, physics, and invention, and his adulthood to theology, charity, and philosophical inquiry. Yet the toll of relentless work, fasting, and inherited illness weighed heavily. From childhood, Pascal had suffered from chronic ailments, migraines, digestive disorders, and what modern historians suspect may have been neurological or autoimmune disease. These afflictions worsened dramatically in his 30s. Doctors recommended rest, rich foods, and leisure. Pascal chose the opposite: poverty, self-denial, and spiritual rigor, a return to simplicity. In 1659, Pascal withdrew from Parisian society and took residence near the Abbey of Port Royal, the Jansenist center that had become his spiritual home. His days followed a strict rhythm: morning prayers and contemplation, scripture reading, occasional scientific notes and letters, simple meals, often intentionally meager, resting under the strain of illness, writing fragments that would become the Pensées. He rarely saw visitors and spoke softly, almost in whispers, as his body weakened. The death of friends and Sister Jacqueline. Pascal's emotional strength was tested further by the loss of loved ones. His beloved Sister Jacqueline, now a nun at Port Royal, passed away in 1661. She had been his closest confidant, the only person who truly shared his spiritual intensity. Her death devastated Pascal. He wrote to a friend, "She was my support, my reflection, and my conscience. God has taken her because he saw I was leaning on her instead of him." He also lost several friends and allies in the Jansenist movement as the Church continued to suppress it. These personal and political tragedies increased Pascal's sense of isolation and urgency. Final acts of generosity. Even in his final year, Pascal continued acts of radical charity. He gave away nearly all his remaining wealth, keeping only a few coins for bread. When asked why he insisted on living among the poor, he replied, Jesus Christ had nowhere to lay his head. He sponsored the education of poor children, provided housing for the destitute, and insisted on walking even when carried in a litter would have been easier, because he believed in sharing in the sufferings of others. His friends pleaded with him to allow medical care. He refused, saying that God alone would heal him or take him. Continued writing through pain. Though racked with agony, Pascal continued working on his fragments, now scattered notes in journals, drawers, and scraps of parchment. He never managed to complete his great apologetic work. Yet these fragments, often written in the margins of his books or dictated in bed, contain some of the most powerful lines in French literature. Man is but a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know. His pensées weren't just philosophical, they were existential cries, poetic hymns to the human condition. The final decline. By the summer of 1662, Pascal could no longer eat solid food. His headaches had become intolerable, his legs swollen, and his internal organs failing. He experienced convulsions and periods of delirium. Doctors diagnosed diseased blood, a vague term that likely masked tuberculosis, cancer, or a neurological collapse. In those days, medical understanding was too limited to pinpoint exact causes. Pascal, aware of his coming death, made peace with it. He refused laudanum, opium, for pain, wanting to remain lucid. He asked for prayers, confession, and Holy Communion. Death of a thinker. On the night of the 19th of August, 1662, Blaise Pascal died in Paris, in the care of a few loyal friends and a priest. He was 39 years old. His final words, spoken with a trembling smile, were, "May God never abandon me." With those words, one of the most extraordinary minds in history fell silent, not defeated, but at peace. The funeral and burial. Pascal was buried in the church of Saint-Étienne-du-Mont in Paris. His grave, like his lifestyle, was humble. There were no great monuments or eulogies from kings. His tombstone read only, "Here lies Blaise Pascal, a Christian." To those who knew him, that was enough. It summed up not only his life's work, but his life's aim. Immediate reactions and legacy. Pascal's death was mourned by Jansenists, scholars, and believers across France. Some saw him as a martyr for the truth, others as a brilliant soul wasted by religious obsession. His scientific peers recognized his genius, but regretted his departure from math and physics. Yet even they could not deny the depth of his religious writing. The fragments he left behind were gathered, edited, and published posthumously in 1670 as the Pensées. The book became an instant classic and has never gone out of print. A life fully lived in few years. Pascal once wrote, "It is not length of life, but depth of life that counts." He lived by that creed. By age 16, he had transformed geometry. By 19, he had built the Pascaline. By 24, he had transformed physics. By 31, he had founded probability theory. By 39, he had written one of the greatest religious texts in history. His was a life cut short, but not unfulfilled. It was a life of suffering, yes, but also of brilliance, faith, and profound human insight. Chapter 7. Legacy and Global Influence. Pascal after death, revered and rediscovered. After Blaise Pascal's death in 1662, his influence did not wane, it deepened. While he had died young, he left behind a body of work that scholars, theologians, scientists, and philosophers would mine for centuries. Though he had not published a complete scientific or philosophical treatise in his lifetime, his letters, notebooks, essays, and pensées formed a posthumous legacy that resonated deeply with multiple disciplines. In France and beyond, Pascal was celebrated as a man whose intellect and soul burned brighter than his years allowed. Scientific reverence, father of multiple fields. In science, Pascal's name quickly became associated with foundational discoveries. He is widely credited as a founding figure in hydrodynamics and fluid mechanics, atmospheric pressure and barometry, probability theory, projective geometry, mechanical computation. The unit of pressure, the Pascal pas, was officially named in his honor in the 20th century by the International System of Units, SID. Every time engineers or physicists measure pressure in pascals, they invoke his legacy. Modern disciplines from meteorology to mechanical engineering rest on principles he discovered or formalized. Theological legacy, a saint without canonization. Though never made a saint by the Catholic Church, Pascal has been called a saint of the modern intellect by many scholars and theologians. His Pensées became a cornerstone of Christian apologetics, particularly within Catholic and Protestant circles. His work influenced later Christian thinkers, including Søren Kierkegaard, C.S. Lewis, Karl Barth, G.K. Chesterton. His concept of faith not as blind belief, but as trust in the unseen amid uncertainty offered a deeply modern take on religion. Pascal and modern philosophy. Pascal's philosophical insights anticipated modern existentialism. He pondered themes such as the absurdity of life without faith, the limits of human reason, the tension between greatness and wretchedness, the inner emptiness that drives humans toward distraction. Existentialists like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, though secular, engaged with Pascal's arguments. Even when they disagreed, they recognized in him a formidable intellect unafraid to face the darkness of the human condition. Pascal was also one of the earliest thinkers to articulate the God-shaped whole, a concept later revisited by theologians and psychologists alike. Literary reverberations. Pascal's prose, especially in the provincial letters and Pensées, is regarded as some of the finest French literature ever written. His writing style is elegant yet direct, rhetorical yet logical, poetic yet exact. French literary giants such as Voltaire, Montaigne, and Victor Hugo praised his clarity, his power of persuasion, and his mastery of language. He is often taught not only in philosophy but in literary studies for his style alone. Pascal in the modern digital age? Pascal's dream of mechanical thinking found new life in the 20th century with the advent of computers. In the 1972nd, computer scientist Niklaus Wirth created the Pascal programming language, named in honor of Blaise Pascal. Pascal's binary view of belief versus unbelief inspired developments in decision theory, AI ethics, and Bayesian probability. His concept of the heart's reason still informs human-centered AI debates today. Modern computer engineers and theorists owe much to Pascal's pioneering conceptual leap that machines could model human thinking through logic and repetition, museums and monuments. Today, Pascal is commemorated around the world. Rue Pascal in Paris honors his name. The Pascalin calculator is displayed in museums such as the Musée des Arts et Métiers. His hometown of Clermont-Ferrand features statues, plaques, and streets that bear his name. University departments across Europe and North America teach Pascal's works in philosophy, mathematics, theology, and literature. The Pascal mystique. Pascal's mystique comes from his paradoxes. A mathematical genius who abandoned math for faith. A rationalist who insisted on the limits of reason. A sickly man who lived with unshakable courage. A prodigy who matured into a spiritual master. This blend makes him uniquely modern, a man of both logic and longing, who faced the cosmic silence with trembling humility. Echoes in popular culture and science. Pascal's name appears in sci-fi literature, where AI machines are called Pascal units. Neuroscience, where his reflections on consciousness are referenced in debates on self-awareness. Ethics, where Pascalian reasoning is used in moral philosophy and risk assessment models. Even the Pascal's wager idea shows up in video games, AI behavior trees, and algorithms that evaluate uncertain outcomes. He is not just a historical figure, he's an enduring symbol of human inquiry. A timeless mind. In every age, Pascal speaks to different people. To scientists, he is a brilliant pioneer. To theologians, a defender of faith. To philosophers, a soul wrestling with meaning. Two writers, a master of language. To every person confronting suffering, uncertainty, or death, Pascal is a companion on the road. Pascal's legacy is not confined to laboratories or monasteries. It stretches into every realm where people ask, "What is the truth of our condition? And how shall we live in its light?" Chapter 8. Pascal's thought in dialogue with the modern world. Relevance in a post-Enlightenment era. The Enlightenment period, dominated by rationalism, empiricism, and scientific optimism, was in many ways the opposite of Blaise Pascal's spiritual worldview. Yet, ironically, Pascal's writings have remained surprisingly resilient, even in an era that deified reason and minimized faith. Why? Because Pascal understood something many Enlightenment thinkers overlooked. That reason has limits, and that human beings are not purely rational. In a post-Enlightenment age, when the optimism of science alone fails to address existential anxiety, Pascal's reflections feel more relevant than ever. Pascal and existentialism. Long before the term existentialism was coined, Pascal had identified core existential themes: the absurdity of human life in a silent universe, the restlessness of the human heart, the need for meaning, even in suffering, the confrontation with death and finitude. Philosophers like Kierkegaard, Camus, and Sartre later explored these questions, often from secular perspectives, but Pascal anticipated them. Man is a nothing compared to the infinite, and an everything compared to nothing, a middle point between all and nothing. He recognized the fragility of human greatness and the greatness of human fragility. Psychology and the restless heart. Modern psychology, particularly in the 20th century, began to echo Pascal's insights. Consider Freud's concept of repression, Jung's theory of the shadow, Viktor Frankl's search for meaning, Carl Rogers' emphasis on authenticity. Pascal wrote, "All of man's misfortune comes from one thing, which is not knowing how to sit quietly in a room." He saw that much of human activity, entertainment, ambition, wealth-seeking was a form of distraction from the fear of nothingness. In this, he prefigured modern insights about addiction, anxiety, and escapism. Pascal's wager in a world of uncertainty, in a world shaken by war, pandemic, climate crisis, and AI, Pascal's wager takes on renewed significance. What should we believe, and how should we act in the face of uncertainty? Pascal argued that betting on God's existence was not irrational, it was a mathematically justified leap. In today's world, his logic has been applied far beyond religion. Climate change risk modeling, better to act than not, even if uncertain, nuclear deterrence theory, AI safety, and existential risk management, decision theory, and utility maximization. Pascal wasn't merely talking about God, he was building the earliest framework for rational decision-making under uncertainty. The wager and modern belief systems. In an age of competing worldviews, secularism, fundamentalism, relativism, Pascal's wager remains provocative. Critics say it reduces belief to a gamble. Pascal replies, "We're already in the game, the dice have been rolled. The only question is how you will play." His wager isn't just about belief, it's about commitment, hope, and eternal stakes. In a world where nihilism looms large, Pascal offers not a proof, but a path, one where faith is not certainty, but a courageous choice. Artificial intelligence and the Pascalian paradox. Today's world is increasingly shaped by machines. AI systems now learn, decide, and adapt qualities once reserved for human minds. And yet, Pascal foresaw a paradox. The machine can calculate but not understand. This distinction remains crucial. AI can mimic cognition but lacks self-awareness, emotion, and spiritual depth. Pascal understood that human uniqueness lies not in intelligence, but in the capacity for suffering, wonder, and grace. His thought challenges modern AI researchers to ask not just, "Can we build it?" but Should we, and why? Pascal's triangle in the age of data. In an age of algorithms and big data, Pascal's triangle is more than a mathematical curiosity. It underpins probability distributions, binomial modeling, game theory, statistical inference. From finance to epidemiology, Pascal's mathematical work continues to inform how we model the future, especially when outcomes are unpredictable. The tools he helped create now power insurance models, poker bots, and quantum computing logic. Theological dialogue with modern secularism. Pascal's theology wasn't built on coercion or dogma. He appealed to reason, emotion, and personal experience. In interfaith and secular religious dialogues today, Pascal offers a rare voice, devout, yet not fanatic, intelligent, yet not arrogant, convicted, yet not closed-minded. He would likely reject both militant atheism and blind faith, urging instead an approach that combined truth-seeking and humility. Pascal's two infinities in modern cosmology. Pascal spoke of two infinities, the infinite vastness of the universe and the infinite smallness of human beings within it. This resonates profoundly in an age of quantum physics, where particles behave unpredictably, astrophysics, where the cosmos stretches beyond comprehension, multiverse theories, where our world may be one of infinite others. Pascal's spiritual awe before the universe aligns with modern scientific wonder and invites reverence rather than despair. A timeless guide for the 21st century, Pascal belongs to no one discipline. He is claimed by mathematicians for his logic, scientists for his method, philosophers for his depth, theologians for his faith, poets for his language, psychologists for his insight, thinkers of conscience for his honesty. His questions are still our questions. His dute, our dute. His longings, our longings. In a time of rapid change, Pascal remains a still point, reminding us, you must wager. It is not optional. You are already committed. Chapter 9, Personal Reflections, Anecdotes, and the Human Side of Pascal. Not just a genius, a man of flesh and spirit, Blaise Pascal is often remembered as a genius, a mind that soared through mathematics, physics, theology, and philosophy. But behind the theorems, the arguments, and the religious fervor was a man of flesh and spirit, vulnerable, often tormented, deeply introspective, and fiercely compassionate. To understand Pascal fully, we must look beyond his intellectual output and explore the daily habits, relationships, quirks, and quiet moments that made him a deeply human figure. The boy who questioned everything. Even in childhood, Pascal was not content with simple answers. His sister Gilberte recalled that he would interrogate natural events, why water flows downhill, why the moon changes shape, why people dream. Once, at the age of 11, he asked his father how one could prove that nothing exists outside the universe. Etienne paused and realized he couldn't answer. That moment cemented Pascal's lifelong curiosity about the infinite and the unseen. He wasn't just a prodigy, he was haunted by the mystery of existence from the very beginning. Unusual habits and sensitivities. Pascal had several peculiar traits. Sound sensitivity. He was disturbed by loud noises, often working in total silence. Obsessive neatness. His notes, though sometimes scribbled in haste, were often recopied into precise, categorized piles. Thin clothing in cold weather. He believed enduring physical discomfort trained the soul. Refusal of comfort. He slept on hard surfaces and declined warm baths, fearing they softened the will. These behaviors may seem extreme, but to Pascal they were ways of resisting distraction and maintaining focus on truth, on suffering, on God. Humor in the shadows. Though often depicted as solemn and austere, Pascal had a sharp wit. His provincial letters are filled with satire, sarcasm, and clever rhetorical traps. For example, in critiquing Jesuit moral casuistry, he wrote, "If you murder a man without malice, merely because you felt like it, you may not be guilty of mortal sin as long as you confess it later." He mocked theological hypocrisy with a laugh, not out of malice, but out of moral urgency. Privately, he could be playful with words, especially with his sister Jacqueline, to whom he would sometimes compose absurd poems or riddles to lighten her monastic days. Love, or the lack of it. Pascal never married and never seems to have been romantically involved. Was this by choice, or was it an effect of his illness or his religious intensity? Some speculate he was emotionally reserved, channeling all of his longing into spiritual love, especially after his conversion. Others believe his early devotion to family, especially to his father and sisters, fulfilled his emotional needs. After his father's death and Jacqueline's entrance into religious life, Pascal increasingly withdrew into himself. If he ever loved romantically, he left no record. His love, in the end, was for humanity, for God, and for truth. Friends and rivals. Despite his withdrawal later in life, Pascal had deep friendships. Florent Perrier, his brother-in-law, remained a confidant and carried out scientific experiments for him. Antoine Arnaud, the Jansenist theologian, exchanged theological ideas with Pascal and respected his clarity of thought. Pierre de Fermat, though more distant, collaborated with Pascal to launch the theory of probability. Pascal also had intellectual tensions, particularly with Descartes, whose rationalism Pascal found overly confident and reductionist. "I cannot forgive Descartes," Pascal once said, "for writing about the entire universe without mentioning that it was made by God." A love for children and the poor. Pascal was deeply moved by the poor, particularly children. He wrote, "The tears of a hungry child are arguments against the existence of wealth." He regularly gave away money and food, and once arranged for several orphan girls to receive education and dowries. He also organized early efforts at public transport in Paris, funding the first version of a public coach system to help laborers move across the city cheaply. His idea was called the Carrosses à 5 sols, 5-penny coaches, a precursor to public transit. Struggles with doubt and depression. Though devoted to God, Pascal was not immune to spiritual dryness and internal torment. His journals record moments of doubt about the effectiveness of prayer, fear of his own pride corrupting his motives, frustration with physical pain that distracted him from contemplation. But he didn't hide these struggles. He turned them into fuel for reflection, believing that honest doubt was better than dishonest faith. The fragility of glory. Pascal was aware that fame is fleeting. He wrote, "We run carelessly to the precipice after putting something in front of us to prevent us seeing it." He declined honors, titles, and money. Even after his scientific discoveries became known across Europe, he insisted they were gifts of God, not proofs of superiority. When a group of noblemen invited him to a private salon to honor his genius, Pascal declined and instead spent the evening visiting a sick friend. Pascal is every man. Despite his genius, Pascal never lost sight of the common human condition. He saw the glory of man, his reason, imagination, art. He saw the misery of man, his addiction to distraction, his slavery to pride. And he saw the answer, not in escape or conquest, but in grace. In many ways, Pascal is not just a hero of the mind, he is a mirror for every thinking person who has struggled to believe, feared death, sought love, or longed for meaning. He reminds us that to be human is to be a mystery unto oneself, and that the pursuit of truth is the noblest, most painful, and most beautiful of journeys. Chapter 10. Conclusion: The Flame That Still Burns. A life measured not in years, but in light. Blaise Pascal lived just 39 years. In a time when lifespans were often short, his was still remarkably brief for someone who changed so many fields. And yet, he achieved more in those years than most do in lifetimes twice as long. He transformed geometry, helped invent computing, launched probability theory, revolutionized physics, and crafted some of the most moving and intellectually powerful works in theology and philosophy. But even more than what he did, it is how he thought and lived that continues to inspire. The unity of knowledge and mystery. Pascal rejected the idea that science and faith must be at war. To him, truth had many facets, but one ultimate source. He believed the greatest error was to stop at surface knowledge, whether in nature, mathematics, or even religion. A little science estranges a man from God. A lot of science brings him back. He lived in the tension between clarity and paradox, logic and wonder. He never claimed certainty, only conviction, forged through reason and humility. Reason is not enough. One of Pascal's deepest messages is this: reason alone is not enough to guide a life. Reason cannot tell us whom to love. Reason cannot carry us through grief. Reason cannot measure the weight of a soul. Pascal called the heart a deeper organ of truth, not irrational, but suprarational. He argued that just as math has axioms, life has first truths that we must accept before we can make meaning. This insight still reverberates in modern debates around ethics, AI, science, and faith. A modern pilgrim. Pascal's spiritual journey makes him one of the first true modern pilgrims. He was not born into blind faith. He questioned, doubted, resisted, suffered, and ultimately surrendered. His faith was hard-won, carved out of the same fears and longings we all feel. That's why his writing still speaks to skeptics, seekers, and believers alike. I believe only the witnesses who let themselves be killed. He didn't argue for faith to feel good. He argued for it because he believed it was true, necessary, and transformative. Death and immortality. Pascal died in suffering, poor and largely forgotten by the political elite of his time. But he never feared death. To him, death was the great clarifier, the moment when all distractions vanish and the human soul meets its creator. His reflections on death were not morbid, but sober, hopeful, and even beautiful. You would not seek me if you had not already found me. In his pain, Pascal found peace not because he escaped death, but because he faced it with open eyes and an open heart. The Pascalian vocation. What does it mean to be Pascalian today? It means loving truth more than comfort. It means accepting suffering as part of wisdom. It means pursuing unity between heart and mind, science and spirit. It means living in the tension of greatness and wretchedness and choosing humility. Pascal shows us that the human condition is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be understood and lived. His words live on. Pascal's words, written in cramped notebooks and hidden in coats, continue to shine in the writings of philosophers like Kierkegaard and C.S. Lewis, in sermons, classrooms, and code written in the Pascal programming language, in hospitals and universities where science grapples with ethics, in the quiet moments when people face doubt, mortality, and longing. He has become what he never sought to be, immortal, not in body, but in influence, language, and wisdom. Pascal and the human story. At the heart of Pascal's legacy is not equations or arguments, but a story of a young boy who saw through illusions, a scientist who changed how we measure pressure, a philosopher who named our condition, a believer who surrendered to mystery. His story is our story, the story of a thinking, longing, broken, beautiful creature called human. Final echo, fire. Let us return to the note Pascal sewed into his coat, the memorial. Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the scholars. Certainty, feeling, joy, peace, God of Jesus Christ. That fire, that encounter, defines everything that came after. It was the core of his soul, the spark behind his math, his physics, his faith. It was not an argument. It was an experience, a moment that made the infinite personal and the universe alive. The flame still burns. Today, centuries after his death, the flame still burns. In libraries and laboratories, in churches and code bases, in debates and prayers, Blaise Pascal lives. He calls us not to blind belief or empty logic, but to a path of integrity, courage, and wholeness. He reminds us that truth is worth the pain, that suffering can teach wisdom, that love can transcend knowledge, and that every human heart longs for something or someone greater than itself. Final words. You must wager. It is not optional. You are already committed. Which way will you lean? Let the Pascalian wager be more than a choice about belief. Let it be a call to live awake, to seek with honesty, to love with depth, and to remain faithful to the mystery. In Blaise Pascal, we do not merely find a mathematician or theologian, we find a mirror, a flame, a fellow pilgrim of truth.